Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Constitution Unlocked. If you've ever wondered, why do we need or even have a constitution, then this episode is for you. Because today, we're talking about America's first attempt at a national government, the Articles of Confederation. And spoiler alert, it did not go exactly as planned. At Constitution Unlocked, I believe kids deserve to know their rights and understand the document that helps define them. I created this podcast to provide that foundation by explaining the Constitution's words, history, debates, and impact in a clear and engaging way. Let's rewind to 1776. The 13 colonies had declared independence from Great Britain, but the Revolutionary War was still being fought. American leaders now faced two enormous challenges: winning independence and figuring out how 13 separate states could govern together. Think about it. These states were literally in the process of rebelling against a powerful king and parliament in England. They were suspicious of distant leaders, national taxes, and any government that might become too powerful. So, instead of building a strong central government, they leaned the other way. Hard. They wanted the states to remain mostly independent while still working together during the war. The result was the Articles of Confederation. Congress approved the Articles in 1777, but they did not officially take effect until 1781, when all 13 states had finally ratified them. The document described the states as a league of friendship because each state received one vote in Congress, regardless of its population size. There was no separate executive branch or president with the power to enforce laws, there was no separate national court system like the one we have today, and Congress could declare war, make treaties, manage foreign relations, and coin money. However, they could not collect taxes directly, regulate trade between the states, or even reliably force the states to provide money and troops. Essentially, Congress had a lot of power on paper, but very little power in reality to carry it out. They were virtually powerless. Now, you may be wondering, why would anyone deliberately create such a weak government? The answer is fear. The people creating the Articles were deeply afraid of tyranny, abuses of power, and losing the independence they had just fought for. In their minds, a strong central government looked dangerously similar to the British government they were trying to escape. So their thinking was, a strong central government equals danger, and a weak central government equals safety. But, as they are about to discover, too much weakness could create a different kind of danger. Let's break down the biggest problems, because this is where things start to unravel. First, there was no power to tax. Congress could ask the states for money, but they could not collect taxes directly from the people. And the states did not and often didn't send what Congress requested. That meant that there was no dependable source of national funding. The government struggled to pay debts from the Revolutionary War, compensate soldiers, and fund basic national needs. Second, there was no control over interstate trade. Each state could create its own trade policy. States sometimes taxed goods coming from neighboring states, and some issued their own paper money. The result was an extremely confused economy filled with competing rules. Third, there was a weak national defense. Congress could request troops from the states, but it could not reliably make the states provide them. It also lacked a steady source of money to support an army. So, if a major crisis broke out, the national government might not have the people or money needed to respond. Fourth, it was extremely difficult to make major decisions. Many important measures required 9 out of the 13 states to agree. And to change the Articles themselves, every single state had to approve. All 13. That's like trying to get your entire class to agree on one group project idea with absolutely no differing opinions. Before we go any further, we have to realize that the Articles were not a complete failure. The government under the Articles helped guide the country through the end of the Revolutionary War. Congress approved the Treaty of Paris, which formally ended the war and recognized the U.S. as an independent nation. It also passed the Northwest Ordinance, which created a process for territories to become states. The problem wasn't that the government could do absolutely nothing. The problem was that it was not strong enough to handle many of the economic, political, and military challenges facing the new nation. These weaknesses became impossible to ignore during Shays Rebellion. In 1786 and 1787, farmers in western Massachusetts were struggling with high state taxes, debt, and an economic depression. When they could not pay what they owned, some faced losing their farms and lands and being sent to debtor's prison. The farmers began protesting and shutting down courts in order to stop judges from ordering their land to be seized. Eventually, a group led by Revolutionary War veteran Daniel Shays attempted to seize a federal weapons arsenal in Springfield, Massachusetts. The protest had become an armed uprising. And here was the problem. The national government did not have the money or reliable military power to respond. Massachusetts eventually used a state militia, funded partly by private citizens, to put down the rebellion. But the event frightened leaders across the country. If another rebellion broke out, or if several happened at once, could the United States keep itself together? For leaders such as George Washington and James Madison, Shays Rebellion was a wake-up call. They worried that the country could break apart and lose everything people had fought for during the Revolution. It was becoming clear that the national government was too weak to survive over the long term. So, in 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia. Their official goal was to revise, or fix, the Articles of Confederation. But once they began meeting, they decided that repairs would not be enough. They started over, completely. The result was the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution created a stronger national government with 3 separate branches. It gave Congress the power to collect taxes and regulate interstate trade, created an executive branch to enforce the laws, and established a federal judiciary to interpret them. But the delegates also knew that too much government power can be very dangerous. And they had learned that too little government power was equally as harmful. So they divided that power among the branches and between the federal government and the states. In other words, the Constitution directly addressed the greatest weaknesses of the Articles while still trying to prevent the new national government from becoming too powerful. Here's something to think about. The U.S. didn't begin with a perfect system. It began as an experiment. And like any experiment, it took trial and error to move closer to something that worked. The Articles of Confederation were that first step. Think of them as America's first draft. They taught the country what worked, what didn't, and why balance matters. Too much power can be dangerous, but too little power can be dangerous too. The Constitution exists because of those lessons. Okay, as we go through our episodes, I thought it'd be fun to end with an interesting fact. For today, the interesting fact is that the Constitution is incredibly tiny. It has about 4,400 words. The average world constitution is roughly 21,000 words. That's almost a 17,000 word difference. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please make sure to follow us on our Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube account. Or follow our Constitution Unlocked profiles on Instagram and TikTok.